time-wise. So, okay, great. So, yeah, I see I froze a little bit just there. Okay, cool. Glad it's better. We were having internet connections earlier today, so I'm glad that so far it's so good. Um, so how much time you can devote is really important. In terms of the GMAT, the best thing that I would recommend is to try to set aside a regular amount of time for studying. So I think that one of the things that a lot of times people will do is, they'll say, well, I'm going to study for 1 hour every night or 2 hours every weekend. And I think that that's fantastic. And try to think of this as something that you put on your calendar, just the same as an appointment or anything else that you would come across. What's your budget to spend on test prep? So test prep doesn't have to be expensive. Test prep can be something that's actually really cheap. If you just go get the Kaplan book and the Princeton Review book, take advantage of some of the online resources, you definitely don't have to spend a ton of money on test prep. Having said that, you can also spend a lot of money, and I think that there are some very good things that you can do. I think one of the best things that you can do is to have some sort of a private tutor. I really think that if you're looking to get a top score on the exam, I definitely think having someone work with you one-on-one, it's a great investment, and it helps you target your practicing and your studying on the things that are most effective for you versus sitting in a class with 20 other people. Now, of course, sitting in a class with 20 other people is probably going to be a bit cheaper, and that's still a great route to go. So that's also a good option. But it's just important to assess. Are you planning to spend thousands of dollars studying, hundreds of dollars of studying, $50 studying? That will affect your choices. And finally, what learning styles work best for you? Some people love sitting in a classroom. Other people would rather just crank on practice exams. Some people would prefer to try to teach somebody else a little bit of the GMAT. That's a great way to study. Teach somebody who's a little bit maybe below your ability. Teach them how to do a question. Person-to-person learning is fantastic. So think about what learning styles work best for you, and then work to your strengths. If you find yourself just getting extremely bored sitting in a traditional classroom, then maybe a tutor is best for you. If you find yourself unable to crack a book, then maybe you need to sit down with more practice exams. Really play to your strengths. There's a bunch of different ways to study for the GMAT, and so don't necessarily feel that you have to go down a certain path if that path isn't working for you. And I recommend to mix it up, and this kind of a little bit contradicts what I just said, but think about it as mixing up the following. Spend some time learning the fundamentals. Spend a good chunk of time doing practice questions. We'll cover some of the sources of practice questions here, I think, in the next slide, and also make sure you're taking some practice exams. That's something that I highly recommend. Do not sit the actual exam without having taken at least 1 or 2 practice exams, preferably more. I think when I took my GMAT, I probably had taken 3 or 4 practice exams prior to actually sitting the real thing, and that's the best way to get an honest assessment of where you're scoring, to get comfortable with the timing, to get comfortable with the computer adaptive format. So some resources that you can use to study. First of all, EduFire. I'll put in a shameless plug here for our site. There's a lot of great tutors that are on EduFire teaching the GMAT. We're going to be having an increasing number of GMAT classes on the site, so this will be a great place for you to study. A lot of benefits of studying here. You don't have to leave your home. It tends to be a lot cheaper. We have a lot of people who, like myself, who have taught at colleges and universities and places like Kaplan and Princeton Review before, and you'll get them at a fraction of the cost that you'd get by going to one of those places. And also too, just there's going to be an increasing amount of resources on the site, and the forums are great places, and we'll hopefully have some flashcards up for the GMAT soon, so there'll be some good stuff on EduFire. GMATtutor.com, as I mentioned before, is a site that I would definitely recommend. The Kaplan and the Princeton Review books are really good. There's been a lot of time and a lot of research over the years devoted to the learning methods that both those companies use. And while I don't think they're the best for everything, I do think that if you were to look at 2 that have kind of stood above the rest, I think those would be the ones. And then also the official guide for the GMAT review. So GMAC, who puts on the GMAT, they publish a book called The Official Guide for GMAT Review, which contains past questions, actual exam questions from the past, which if you're going to try to study, you might as well study with questions that were actually used before. Kaplan, Princeton Review, any other book out there What they're doing is they're creating questions that try to mimic questions that have been given in the past. And there's a subtle difference. It's not huge, but depending upon who else you're going to, those questions may not be as representative of the questions you'll see on the actual exam. The closest place that you can find for questions that will be similar to what you'll see on the actual exam is the official guide for GMAT review. They also have GMAT prep software, and if you go to MBA.com, there's online practice exams that you can take. So I highly recommend those to people who are preparing for the exam, because you really want to get as close to the type of practice questions that you'll be seeing on exam day. So that wraps up the presentation portion. So now what I'd love to do is hear any questions that any of you have. If you want to ask a question on audio or video, what you can do is you can go ahead and you can raise your hand. In the bottom left corner of the screen, you'll see something that says status options, and if you click that down arrow, there's a raise hand option. And then what I'll do is I'll make it available for you to come in on audio or video. If you've never been on audio or video before, it's pretty easy to do, but you may want to just go ahead and text in your question as well. Otherwise, if you have any other questions, just go ahead and put them in the chat pod and I will answer them for you. So DJ asks, who runs MBA.com? And MBA.com is actually put on by the people who make the GMAT exam. So basically they have a book they publish, they do the actual exam, they do test prep software, which includes multiple computer adaptive tests, and then they have all the resources at MBA.com. So they actually give away quite a bit of stuff for free for people to prep with, which is awesome that they do that. Of course, they make a ton of money off of administering the exam. But that's one of the first places that I recommend for people to go, just because the quality of the questions there is going to be very comparable to what you're actually going to see on test day. So Ron asks, do most CBTs use the same type of scoring, or is this mostly just the GMAT? So I think you're referring to other computer adaptive tests. I know CBT sometimes is used to mean computer-based training, kind of like the CD-ROM-based training stuff. As far as computer adaptive tests using the same type of scoring, I actually don't know that. Now, I know there are some other computer adaptive tests. When I took the GMAT as a computer adaptive test back in 2002, I guess it was, there weren't very many other exams using the computer adaptive test modality. Now that's changed. There are a number of others that are using it, but having been kind of out of the Kaplan world for a little bit, I'm not really sure who else is using it and if it's exactly the same type of scoring. So I couldn't vouch for any other exams. And DJ asks, are there any blogs to follow on MBA stuff? There are a few that I've seen. However, there aren't that many good ones. I've come across a couple of, and there's one. I'll see if I can post it to the forums on EduFire. There's one that I came across that actually had some pretty good articles, and I'll see if I can find a link to that and post that there. But there really isn't much in the blog world, and I don't know why that is. Koichi's been looking a little bit too, and yeah, it's something that I think part of it probably is just simply due to the fact that the test is pretty static in nature. It really hasn't changed much, and when stuff doesn't change much, you don't typically get people blogging about it too often. It's not like there's late breaking news on the GMAT. Now, there was a scandal recently where there was a website out there that was selling actual GMAT questions where someone had gone into the test with a camera and photoed a bunch of questions, and crazy stuff like that happens from time to time. But yeah, it's something where I haven't really seen much in terms of people blogging about the GMAT. We try to Twitter about the GMAT every once in a while on EduFire.